Saragarhi's immortal heroes, the epic stand of 22 Sikhs against 14,000. 12th of September 1897, as the first rays of morning illuminated the sharp rocks of the Samana Mountains, Havildar Ishar Singh leaned against the cold wall of the stone signal tower, gazing at the horizon. The sight before him took his breath away for a moment. His heart pounded, his hands clenched into fists, because the endless sea of people filling the valleys, tens of thousands of rifles gleaming under the sun, the Pashtun warriors of the Afridi and Orakzai tribes rising in waves, that massive army numbering in the tens of thousands slowly climbing the hills raising dust and smoke. And Ishar understood in that moment that he and his 21 men had to make perhaps the most impossible decision in history. Either they would flee, or try to reach Fort Lockhart through the rugged terrain and probably fall into an ambush along the way, or they would stay here, behind these stone walls, and fight to their last breath. And incredibly they chose to fight. Thus began one of the most unequal battles in military history. 22 Sikh soldiers against a force of up to 14,000. The lands of Afghanistan had been the graveyard of foreign powers for centuries, and this truth was written in blood and fire on every page of history. In the winter of 1842, the British lost an army of 16,000 while fleeing Kabul. Only Assistant Surgeon William Brydon reached Jalalabad half dead, his skull split by a sword, and when asked, "Where is the army?" he replied, "I am the army." In the 1980s, the Soviets fought for 9 years on these lands and lost at least 14,000 soldiers, as historian William Maley said. The United States survived Vietnam, but the Soviets did not survive Afghanistan. From 2001 to 2021, the Americans tried for a full 20 years to defeat the Taliban, lost 3,500 coalition soldiers and 92,000 Afghan allies, finally leaving with an ignominious retreat. And now it was the turn of these 22 Sikhs. Would they too become part of these cursed lands? By the 1890s, the British had chosen a more pragmatic path instead of invading Afghanistan, paying money to the Afridi Pashtun tribes, who in return would protect the Khyber Pass. It was a fragile peace, but at least it was peace. However, in 1897, this alliance shattered. The Afridis united with the Orakzai and Chamkani tribes to form a massive force of 50,000, now threatening the empire's borders. And although 2 attacks on Fort Gulistan in the Samana Mountains on November the 3rd and 9th were prevented by imperial forces, the British were so alarmed they had to send a relief column from Fort Lockhart. It was at this very moment the Pashtuns made a more insidious plan. The 2 forts could not see each other, could not communicate directly if they captured the vital communication link between them. The Saragarhi signal station on that rocky ridge, the forts would be blind, the defense would collapse. The man guarding Saragarhi was Havildar Ishar Singh, a strong-willed, fierce-tempered, independent-spirited Punjabi Sikh, and Major General James Lunt had made an apt assessment of him. Ishar was a nuisance in camp, invincible in battle. Yes, in peacetime this man was a problem. He would object to orders, argue, fight constantly. But when war came, you couldn't find a better soldier than him, and he had 2 reliable NCOs with him, Corporal Lal Singh and Lance Corporal Chanda Singh. Under his command were 18 sepoys, including signalman Gurmukh Singh and civilian cook Dada. 22 men total, just 22. 22 brave men protecting the critical communication line between the 2 forts. They had Martini Henry rifles, but only 400 rounds of ammunition. The Pashtun rebels were armed with copies of captured British rifles and outnumbered the Sikhs by more than 500 to 1. If ammunition ran out, they would have to rely on bayonets and fists. When the sentries first saw that massive crowd gathering in the valleys that morning, their blood must have run cold. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, all coming this way, and there was no such thing as victory. It was impossible. But strangely, there was no fear either, because Sikh warrior belief said very clearly what must be done in such a situation. Fleeing was shameful, surrender was dishonorable, the only option was to fight to the death. And when the Pashtuns called from the foothills, "Listen, Sikhs, why are you fighting us? This is not your war, this is the British war. You leave, we won't touch you." Ishar and his men gave little credence to these words, because the Afridis had made promises before, said they would protect the Khyber Pass for the empire. Then what happened? Betrayal. Always betrayal. And from the perspective of the 36th Sikhs, leaving their position and throwing themselves on the mercy of the enemy was suicide, according to military historian Pushpinder Singh Chopra. The Sikhs gave a very profane answer to the Afghans. History has not recorded what this crude answer was, but the meaning is very clear. Today, There is absolutely no surrender. Today, there is death to the end. Signalman Gurmukh Singh rushed to the heliograph signal device, began sending urgent messages to Lieutenant Colonel John Houghton stationed at Fort Lockhart. Enemy approaching main gate, urgent reinforcement needed. And when Houghton's reply came, the meaning it contained was terrible. Cannot break through. Hold position. Now they were alone. Help would not come. They would probably die. But still. As Jai Singh Sohal noted, there was hope, because Lieutenant Colonel Houghton was not a man to leave a single soldier behind. He would surely do something. Help would come. The question was only when. At 9 in the morning, the Pashtuns tired of talking and launched their first assault on the signal station. They attacked the station from 3 sides at once, from the north, south, west. The 4th side was a steep cliff, and attack from there was impossible. The Sikhs were cornered, but this was also an advantage because they only needed to defend 3 fronts, and the first wave was a complete disaster for the Pashtuns. The Sikhs were in a much better position. They rained deadly fire from their elevated positions, and as the Pashtuns retreated, they left behind at least 60 corpses, bodies lying lifeless on the mountainside, and dozens wounded. Ishar and his men had won the first round, but at what cost? They had used 25% of their ammunition, and the battle had just begun. At the foot of the hills, the Pashtun commanders realized this would not be as easy as they thought and decided to change tactics. Crouching behind rocks, crawling through the natural folds of the terrain, they began advancing more carefully, more deliberately. But this time they had a very important additional weapon. 2 men had remained hidden among the dead during the first assault, concealed, carefully observing the defenses, identifying weak points, and now they had set to work. Those 2 tribesmen on the ridgeline had crawled to directly beneath the walls of the northwest bastion. There in the dead angle, in a spot the Sikhs could not see, they had taken position and begun digging beneath the station's foundations at Fort Gulistan. Major Deveux was watching this sabotage in horror and frantically trying to send warning messages. The signalman waved his mirror again and again, reflecting the sun's light toward Saragarhi, but no response came because Gurmukh Singh could not see the messages from Gulistan. The Pashtuns had set fire to the brush on the northwest side of the station, and the fire had spread to a large area. Smoke had settled like a shroud on the northwest ridge, completely obscuring the signal from Gulistan. Gurmukh could maintain contact with Fort Lockhart from his tower, but not with Fort Gulistan, and perhaps he could not communicate with both forts at the same time, because operating a signal station normally required 3 men, but Ishar had probably deployed the other 2 sepoys to fighting positions, and Gurmukh was now trying to do the work of 3 men alone, sending signals, reading responses, taking notes. At midday, Gurmukh reported in his message to Fort Lockhart that one of the sepoys had fallen, Sepoy Bhagwan Singh, the battle's first casualty, and the Sikhs made great effort rather than leaving their comrade outside in the midday sun. They carried Bhagwan's body to the inner buildings. Corporal Lal Singh and Sepoy Jiwan Singh carried their brother's body on their shoulders, because this was a matter of honor. Showing respect for their dead was among the most sacred parts of Sikh tradition, and the corporal may have been seriously wounded during this action, but he did not care. At 1400, the seriousness of the situation became fully apparent. Gurmukh Singh signaled, "Ammunition running low. Urgently need ammunition, otherwise cannot hold." But the response from Fort Lockhart was again the same, cruelly the same. "Continue waiting, nothing else we can do." And Lieutenant Colonel Houghton decided to make a move. 14 soldiers from the Royal Irish Regiment set out from Lockhart. They would snipe at the Pashtuns from a distance. The idea was to draw the tribes away from the station and buy some time for the 36th Sikhs, but the Pashtuns did not take the bait. Shortly after 1500, disaster struck. The 2 men who had been digging beneath the northwest wall for a full 6 hours had finished their work. Major Deveux watched helplessly and in horror as the northwest wall began to collapse. The 2 diggers began pounding the fortification with rocks and sticks to hasten the collapse, and rapidly a massive breach about 7 feet wide opened in the wall, and what the enemy had hoped for happened. Thousands of Pashtuns let out a tremendous war cry and charged down the slope, some running for the breach in the wall while others attacked the compound's main gate. Now everywhere was in chaos, and Ishar and his men understood exactly what was happening. They desperately rushed to defend the breach, fixed their bayonets, and met the tribes, as Jai Singh Sohal wrote. As the tribesmen trampled over their own dead and wounded to get into Saragarhi, the few Sikhs remaining inside put up a stubborn defense. And this defense was incredible, but of course it could not last forever, because Jazile fire was raining down from the nearby hills. Bullets from those long-barreled rifles were hitting targets up to 500 meters away. picking off the Sikhs one by one, the sheer weight of numbers. That massive human tide slowly began pushing the Sikhs back, and Ishar Singh, at that critical moment, ordered his men to fall back to an inner, more secure perimeter. As his men retreated, Ishar continued to hold the breach alone, fighting with his bayonet, his knife, everything he had, perhaps killing a few more tribesmen, finally falling beneath the blades. Havildar Ishar Singh, the man who was a nuisance in camp but magnificent in battle, had breathed his last. The remaining Sikhs were now seeking final defensive positions, choosing the places where they would die. One sepoy locked himself in a guardroom and began firing at attackers through holes in the wall. Pashtun records say this single sepoy killed 20 tribesmen with his rifle. When the enemy realized they could not storm this position, they simply set the hut on fire, and that brave sepoy died a martyr in the flames. The remaining Sikhs were now inside the tower, fighting a losing battle with the tribes. As the Pashtuns advanced higher and higher toward the tower, Gurmukh Singh had remained at his post, continuing to signal Fort Lockhart, and he knew almost everything was over, because listening from the upper floor of the tower, the shouts and gunfire from his comrades were growing steadily quieter. Meanwhile, the voices of the Pashtuns, their screams, their footsteps were growing closer, and he sent his final message to Fort Lockhart. One man left, requesting permission to come down and join the fight. The signalmen at Lockhart had realized all was lost, sent his somber reply, "Permission granted." Barricading himself in the signal hut, Gurmukh now took a fighting position. At the start of the day, the odds were 14,000 to 22. Now, after nearly a full day of bloody struggle, perhaps around 13,600 to 1. But Gurmukh's comrades had inflicted deep wounds on that army of 14,000. Hundreds of tribesmen had died, and now 19-year-old Gurmukh had to face the remnants of that massive force alone. He probably killed about 40 more enemies, found himself in a strong position as the tribes tried to charge through the choke point, but could not last forever. After repeated attempts, the Pashtuns realized taking Gurmukh's fortress by storm was impossible, and applied a simple but effective tactic. They simply set the signal hut on fire. Flames rose and began to burn Gurmukh. As his final moments approached, Gurmukh cried out again and again, "Bole So Nihal, Sat Shri Akal." These were the most sacred words of Sikh faith. Blessed for eternity is one who says God is the ultimate truth. And according to Singh Sohal's belief, Gurmukh fought until he knew all was lost, resisted to the final moment, when only a single rifle round remained. He turned the weapon on himself and put the last bullet through his own head, because dying by one's own hands was more honorable than falling into enemy captivity. Gurmukh Singh was 19 years old, just 19, in the spring of his life, and this is how he died. The entire garrison, including Cook Dada, now lay dead. 22 brave men, 22 heroes, the Battle of Saragarhi, perhaps the most unequal last stand in the history of human conflict, was over, and Ishar's 22 Sikhs had written themselves into the history books in blood. During the assault, between 180 and 450 Pashtuns died. Some sources put the number at 1,400, but still these losses had bought important time for defenders elsewhere. And after burning the signal station, the Pashtuns advanced along the ridge to Gulistan. There was Major Devoyu's garrison of 3 officers and 175 Sikh soldiers, plus civilians, including the major's pregnant wife and children. The bloodshed was not over. Sikh forces showed themselves for a second time that day at Gulistan, and continued to fight heroically for the next 2 days until help finally arrived, inflicted heavy casualties on the advancing tribes. Hundreds of Pashtuns fell, but the Sikhs at Gulistan lost only 2 men. Again a miracle, again an epic. And on the morning of September 15th, as the victorious 36th Sikh Regiment returned from Gulistan, British soldier J.A. Lindsay said, "They carried the standards they had captured from the enemy, a magnificent unit. I have never seen such soldiers." The Battle of Saragarhi was among the opening engagements of the 7-month Tira campaign. By April the following year, British forces under William Lockhart and Pratap Singh suppressed the Pashtun uprising, but at heavy cost. British forces suffered 1,150 casualties, and perhaps the most bitter indicator of Britain's attitude toward colonial troops at that time. Nowhere is it recorded how many Indian soldiers died suppressing the uprising. They were just numbers, not names. And against the bloody backdrop, the events of September 12, 1897 could easily have been buried in obscurity. It was a relatively small clash, a rare defeat in an ultimately victorious campaign. But the nature of the battle, the unequal odds, the incredible courage, Incredible honor and endless loyalty shown by those men at Saragarhi, hundreds of miles from their homes, ensured those events would never be forgotten. And 10 years later, the Camperdown Chronicle carried this memorial. The magnificent defense by native soldiers for nearly 9 hours until totally annihilated was unparalleled in the events of the frontier war of 10 years ago and is now historical. September 12th is therefore a day memorable in the history of Indian frontier regiments. At the sun-baked frontier stations, the memory of the brave men who fought to the death for the honor of British service is kept alive by a general holiday on every anniversary of the defense. All defenders were awarded the Indian Order of Merit, their grieving families given 50 acres of land and 500 rupees each. To this day, 3 magnificent monuments serve as memorials to those men's courage, one at the battlefield itself, the other 2 at Amritsar and Firozpur. Saragarhi Day is still observed every year on the anniversary of the battle. It is the regimental battle honors day of the Sikh regiment, and the brightest part of their proud history. And General Lunt's words still echo today, still inspire. Ishar Singh may have been a nuisance in camp, but on September 12, 1897, for approximately 9 hours, the Havildar and his comrades defended the imperial frontier with such incredible skill, such endless courage, such magnificent honor, that Queen Victoria herself could not have asked for better men to do the job. The past has more secrets to tell. Subscribe to uncover them.